The transport helicopter's blades carved through the humid Georgia air as it descended toward Fort Benning's elite marksmanship training facility. Inside the cramped cabin, 23 of the military's most accomplished sharpshooters sat in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the intensive program that awaited them. The Advanced Precision Rifle Course was legendary, a 6-week gauntlet that separated the truly exceptional from the merely excellent. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the aircraft touched down on the landing pad, the candidates began filing out, their gear bags heavy with precision equipment that represented thousands of dollars in cutting-edge technology. Barrett rifles in custom cases, high-end optics, worth more than most people's cars, and ballistic computers that could calculate shooting solutions faster than most humans could think. Among them stepped off a woman who looked almost out of place in this gathering of elite operators. Rebecca "Becca" Martinez appeared younger than her 28 years, with shoulder-length auburn hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail and wire-rimmed glasses that gave her an academic appearance rather than that of a hardened military specialist. Her gear bag was noticeably smaller and worn, lacking the rigid cases and professional stickers that adorned the equipment of her peers. The other candidates barely glanced at her as they moved toward the main building. Most were Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Scout snipers, and Air Force Special Operations personnel. Their bearings spoke of years in elite units, multiple deployments, and countless hours behind precision rifles. They moved with the confident swagger of those who had proven themselves in the world's most demanding environments. Staff Sergeant Derek Thompson, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a chest full of ribbons, hefted his Barrett M82A1 case with casual ease. "Looks like they're letting anyone into the course these days," he muttered to his buddy, Sergeant First Class Mike Rodriguez, as they watched Becca struggle slightly with the weight of her standard-issue duffel bag. Rodriguez, a Marine Corps veteran with 3 combat tours under his belt, smirked as he adjusted his own expensive rifle case. Probably some admin clerk who scored high at the range once. Wait until she sees what real shooting looks like. The group made their way into the facility's main briefing room, where rows of chairs faced a podium flanked by display cases filled with historic rifles and awards. The walls were covered with photographs of previous course graduates, their faces bearing the satisfied expressions of those who had conquered one of the military's most challenging programs. Chief Warrant Officer James Harrison entered the room like a force of nature. At 52, he was a legend in precision rifle circles, with confirmed kills stretching back through 3 decades of military service. His weathered face bore the marks of countless hours squinting through scopes, and his presence commanded immediate silence from even the most accomplished operators in the room. "Welcome to hell, ladies and gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned every word he spoke. "Over the next 6 weeks, we're going to push you beyond what you thought was possible. Some of you will discover capabilities you never knew you had. Others will discover that being good at your home station doesn't mean squat here." His eyes swept across the assembled candidates, pausing briefly on each face. When his gaze fell on Becca, something flickered across his expression, not quite recognition, but a momentary shift that suggested he knew something the others didn't. "Before we begin," Harrison continued, "we need to address equipment assignments. This course uses a standardized rifle platform to ensure fair evaluation of your skills rather than your gear budget." A murmur rippled through the room as several candidates exchanged concerned glances. They had brought their personally customized precision rifles specifically for this course. Harrison gestured to a long table that had been wheeled into the room, covered with a green military tarp. "Each of you will be assigned a rifle based on a random selection process. These weapons have been maintained to military standards, but they represent various conditions and capabilities you might encounter in real-world operations. He pulled away the tarp to reveal 23 rifles laid out in a neat row. Even from a distance, the differences were immediately apparent. Some were pristine modern precision rifles with advanced optics and custom stocks. Others were older models with worn finishes and basic scopes. At the far end of the table sat what appeared to be the worst of the lot, a rifle that looked like it had been pulled from storage after decades of neglect. "The selection process is simple," Harrison announced. "You'll draw numbers from this hat. Number 1 gets first choice, number 23 gets what's left, fair and random." The drawing began, and one by one, the candidates selected their numbers. Thompson drew number 3 and grinned with satisfaction, knowing he would have his pick of the best equipment. Rodriguez pulled number 7 and nodded approvingly. Other elite operators drew low numbers and began eyeing the premium rifles on the table with obvious anticipation. Becca reached into the hat and pulled out a small piece of paper. When she unfolded it, the number 23 stared back at her. She looked at it for a moment, then simply folded the paper and put it in her pocket without expression. "Tough break, sweetheart," Thompson said with mock sympathy. "Looks like you get the leftovers." The selection process began, and it played out exactly as expected. The candidates with low numbers claimed the best rifles: pristine Remington 700s with competition triggers, custom Macmillan stocks, and high-end Leupold optics. As the numbers climbed higher, the quality of available rifles declined noticeably. By the time Becca's turn arrived, only one rifle remained on the table. It was a Remington Model 788, a budget hunting rifle from the 1970s that had clearly seen better days. The stock was dinged and scratched, the bluing was worn thin in several places, and the scope looked like something from a pawn shop bargain bin. The entire setup appeared to be worth less than what some of the other candidates had spent on their scope rings alone. "Well, Martinez," Harrison said, his voice carrying a tone that the others couldn't quite interpret, "looks like you get the Remington 788. Serial number suggests it was manufactured in 1974. The scope is a fixed 4-power Weaver from about the same era. Previous users have reported the trigger pull at about 6 pounds, and the barrel has approximately 40,000 rounds through it." Becca approached the table and picked up the rifle, examining it with the same careful attention she might give to a precision instrument. She worked the bolt, feeling the action's movement, then shouldered the weapon to check the length of pull and scope alignment. The other candidates watched with barely concealed amusement as she handled what they clearly considered a piece of junk. "That thing belongs in a museum," Rodriguez commented, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've seen better rifles at yard sales." Sergeant Major Patricia Wells, one of only 3 women in the course and a respected Army marksmanship unit competitor, shook her head sympathetically. "Bad luck with the draw, Martinez. That rifle's going to make this course about 10 times harder for you." "Harder?" Thompson laughed. "It's going to make it impossible. Look at that scope. I bet it doesn't even hold 0 past 200 yards. Becca continued her examination of the rifle, running her fingers along the barrel and checking the mounting screws on the scope rings. Her expression remained neutral, giving no indication of frustration or disappointment. If anything, she seemed to be studying the weapon with genuine interest rather than dismay. "The good news," Harrison announced, "is that you'll have the rest of today to familiarize yourselves with your assigned rifles. Tomorrow we begin with basic marksmanship evaluation at known distances. I suggest you use this time wisely." As the briefing concluded and candidates began to disperse, small groups formed around those with the premium rifles. They admired the custom work, compared features, and discussed optimal load development for their precision ammunition. The conversations buzzed with technical terminology about ballistic coefficients, muzzle velocities, and wind drift calculations. Becca found herself increasingly isolated as the other candidates gravitated toward those with equipment they respected. She sat alone at a corner table, methodically disassembling her rifle to examine its internal components. The bolt came apart in her hands with practiced ease, and she studied each piece with the attention of someone who understood mechanical systems at a fundamental level. "You know," said Captain Lisa Chun, an Air Force Special Operations sniper who had drawn number 15 and ended up with a decent but unremarkable rifle, "if you're having trouble with that antique, I might be able to help. I've worked on older systems before." Becca looked up from her disassembly work and smiled. "Thanks, I appreciate the offer. Just getting to know how everything fits together. Every rifle has its own personality." Chun examined the parts spread across the table. "That's a pretty generous way to describe it. This thing looks like it's held together with hope and good intentions. The rifling is probably shot out, and that trigger mechanism looks like it belongs in a tractor. The rifling actually looks surprisingly good," Becca replied, peering down the barrel from the chamber end. "Someone's taken care of this rifle, even if it doesn't look like much from the outside. The crown is still sharp, and the throat shows minimal erosion." Thompson overheard the conversation and wandered over, his own pristine rifle case propped against a nearby chair. "Martinez, right? Look, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but you're going to struggle with that piece of junk. This course has a 40% washout rate, even with good equipment. With that museum relic, you might want to start thinking about alternative career paths." "The rifle's not that bad," Becca said quietly, continuing to work on the bolt assembly. "It just needs some attention. Not that bad." Rodriguez joined the conversation, drawn by Thompson's booming voice. "Martinez, I've been shooting competitively for 15 years. I can tell you right now that a rifle will be lucky to hold 3-inch groups at 100 yards. The rest of us will be shooting sub-MOA while you're trying to hit the broad side of a barn." Several other candidates had gathered around, forming a loose circle that felt increasingly like a tribunal. Their expensive rifles and high-end optics created a stark contrast to Becca's humble equipment spread across the table. "Maybe we could talk to Harrison about getting you a different rifle," suggested Wells, though her tone suggested she didn't hold much hope for success. "Explain that the random draw created an unfair disadvantage." "The draw was fair," Becca replied, beginning to reassemble the bolt. "Everyone had the same chance. Besides, the rifle might surprise you." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This comment drew outright laughter from several of the candidates. Thompson slapped his knee dramatically. "Surprise us? The only surprise would be if that thing fired when you pulled the trigger. Martinez, I've forgotten more about precision shooting than most people ever learn, and I'm telling you, that rifle is going to end your course before it starts." "Maybe that's the point," added Sergeant First Class Tony Williams, a Marine Scout sniper with an impressive record of confirmed kills. "Could be they're trying to weed out people who don't belong here. Give them equipment that matches their skill level." The group's laughter had an edge to it now, and Becca found herself the center of attention in a way that felt increasingly uncomfortable. She finished reassembling the rifle and began cleaning the barrel with a rod and patches, her movements methodical and precise. "You know what I think?" Thompson continued, warming to his theme. "I think Martinez here is going to wash out by day 3. That rifle's going to jam, the scope's going to shift, and she's going to be packing her bags while the rest of us are just getting started." "I'll take that bet," Rodriguez chimed in. "I say she doesn't make it past the first qualification round. Tomorrow." One look at her target and she realized she's in over her head. Chun, despite her earlier offer to help, was nodding along with the others. "It's not personal, Martinez. It's just reality. This course is designed to push elite shooters to their limits. Without proper equipment, You're fighting a losing battle from the start. Becca continued her cleaning routine, running patches through the barrel until they came out spotless. The rifle was old and worn, but it was becoming clear that someone had maintained it with care over the decades. The action cycled smoothly. The trigger, while heavy, broke cleanly, and the scope, despite its age, had clear glass and solid mounting. "You're awfully quiet over there," Williams observed. "Starting to realize what you're up against?" "Just getting ready for tomorrow," Becca replied, shouldering the rifle to check the scope's eye relief. "Should be interesting." "Interesting is one word for it," Thompson said. "Humiliating might be more accurate." As the afternoon wore on, the divide in the group became more pronounced. The candidates with premium equipment formed an informal elite within the elite, discussing advanced shooting techniques and sharing stories of their most impressive shots. They spoke with the confidence of those who had never doubted their superiority, and their equipment served as both a tool and status symbol. Becca worked alone, methodically checking every aspect of her rifle's function. She adjusted the scopes, parallax, tested the trigger pull weight, and even fashioned a makeshift shooting rest from her gear to check the rifle's zero. Her isolation was complete. Now the other candidates had written her off as either delusional or simply unprepared for the reality she would face. But as the sun began to set over Fort Benning and the candidates prepared for their first night at the facility, none of them noticed the small, satisfied smile that crossed Becca's face as she locked her rifle in the assigned weapons rack. The Remington 788 might look like a relic, but she had discovered something in her examination that the others had missed entirely. Tomorrow would indeed be interesting. Dawn broke gray and humid over Fort Benning, the morning mist clinging to the pine trees that surrounded the Advanced Precision Rifle Course facility. At 05:00 hours sharp, the candidates assembled in the armory to collect their assigned weapons for the first day of evaluation. The atmosphere was electric with nervous energy and competitive tension. Chief Warrant Officer Harrison stood behind a podium, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the assembled shooters. "Today begins your real education," he announced. "We'll start with basic marksmanship evaluation at known distances, 100, 300, and 600 yards. Each shooter fires 10 rounds at each distance. Your scores will establish baseline capabilities and identify areas requiring improvement." The candidates filed past the weapons rack, each claiming their assigned rifle. Thompson hefted his pristine Remington 700 with obvious satisfaction, running his hand along the custom Macmillan stock like a man caressing a fine automobile. Rodriguez examined his Savage 110 Tactical, nodding approvingly at the adjustable AccuTrigger and heavy barrel profile. Becca approached her section of the rack and retrieved the worn Remington 788. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the armory, it looked even more decrepit than it had the previous day. The stock showed decades of dings and scratches, and the scope's finish was worn thin from countless hands. Several candidates couldn't help but snicker as she slung the rifle over her shoulder. "Did they pull that thing out of a time capsule?" whispered Sergeant Angela Foster, an Army National Guard competitor who had drawn a respectable Tikka T3. "I've seen props in war movies that looked more convincing." The group moved to the range where targets waited at precisely measured distances. The morning air was still, with minimal wind, ideal conditions for establishing accurate baseline scores. Range safety officers took their positions, and Harrison climbed into the tower overlooking the firing line. "Gentlemen and ladies," Harrison's voice boomed over the loudspeaker system, "you will fire in relay format. First relay, take your positions at the 100-yard line." Thompson was assigned to firing point number 1, the position traditionally reserved for the senior shooter. He deployed his custom bipod with theatrical precision, adjusted his eyes, scopes parallax, and settled into a textbook prone position. His movements were smooth and practiced, demonstrating the muscle memory of thousands of rounds fired in competition and combat. Rodriguez occupied point 3, methodically checking his rifle's 0 before loading his first magazine. His breathing was controlled and rhythmic, the hallmark of a seasoned competitor who understood the mental game as well as the physical requirements. Becca found herself assigned to firing point 17, near the end of the line. She lowered herself into position with economical movements, using her patrol pack as a makeshift rest for the worn rifle. The contrast between her setup and those of her competitors was stark, where they had expensive bipods and precision accessories. She made do with field-expedient solutions. "Jesus Christ," muttered Staff Sergeant Kevin Murphy, firing from point 16. "This isn't a competition, it's a charity case. Someone should tell her this isn't bring your grandfather's hunting rifle day." The laughter rippled down the firing line, but Becca appeared oblivious to the commentary. She was focused entirely on her sight picture, making minute adjustments to her position and breathing pattern. The old Weaver scope might have been basic, but it was mechanically sound, and she worked within its limitations rather than fighting. Against them, Relay 1, "Commence firing," Harrison commanded. 10 rounds, unlimited time, make them count. The firing line erupted in a symphony of precisely timed shots. Thompson's custom rifle barked with mechanical precision, each round fired at the exact moment his breathing cycle reached its natural pause. Rodriguez followed a similar rhythm, his shots spaced at regular intervals that spoke of disciplined trigger control. Down the line, other elite shooters demonstrated their training and experience. Captain David Lee, a Marine Corps precision marksman, fired his Accuracy International rifle with robotic consistency. Master Sergeant Robert Clark, an Army Special Forces veteran, showed why he was considered one of the best long-range shooters in his unit. Becca's rifle sounded different from the others. The report was sharper, less refined than the tuned precision of the modern weapons. But her shooting cadence was as steady as anyone's on the line, each shot fired after careful deliberation and sight alignment. "Cease fire, cease fire," Harrison announced after the last shooter completed their string. "Make your rifle safe and step back from the firing line." Range personnel moved downrange to score the targets, their evaluation sheets ready to record the morning's performance. This was the moment that would separate pretenders from contenders, when months or years of training would be distilled into a simple numerical score. The results were announced in firing point order, and they reflected exactly what everyone expected. Thompson scored a 98 out of a possible 100, losing only 2 points to shots that barely touched the scoring rings. Rodriguez managed a 97, with 1 shot slightly wide of the 10 ring. Lee scored a perfect 100, drawing appreciative nods from his competitors. As the announcements continued down the line, a clear pattern emerged. The candidates with premium equipment were posting scores in the high 90s, exactly what their reputations and gear suggested they would achieve. The few shooters with lesser equipment were scoring in the low 90s, respectable, but clearly disadvantaged by their rifles' limitations. "Firing point 17, the range officer called out, consulting his score sheet. "Martinez, Rebecca. Score, 100. A moment of silence fell over the firing line. Several candidates turned to look at Becca, certain they had misheard the announcement. Thompson's confident expression flickered with confusion. "Did he say 100? Foster asked quietly. "Must be a mistake," Williams replied. "Probably meant to say 90 or 80. Harrison's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "That's confirmed firing point 17, perfect score. Outstanding shooting, Martinez." The disbelief was palpable. Several candidates actually walked over to examine Becca's target, which displayed 10 perfectly centered holes clustered in the 10 ring with precision that would have been impressive from any rifle, let alone the ancient Remington she was using. "This is impossible," Thompson said, studying the target with obvious frustration. That rifle can't shoot this accurately. The barrel's probably shot out, the trigger's garbage, and that scope ... He trailed off, unable to complete his criticism in the face of undeniable evidence. Maybe she got lucky, Rodriguez suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. 10 shots is a small sample size. Could be a statistical anomaly. The murmuring continued as the group prepared for the 300-yard stage. Theories proliferated about how someone with such inferior equipment could have achieved a perfect score. Some suggested the scoring system was flawed, others that the targets had been mixed up during collection. At 300 yards, the shooting became more challenging. Wind conditions had picked up slightly, and the increased distance magnified every small error in shooting technique or equipment performance. The candidates settled into their positions with renewed focus, determined to prove that the 100-yard results were an aberration. Once again, Thompson and Rodriguez delivered expected performances scores in the high 90s that reflected their skill and equipment advantages. Lee maintained his perfect shooting, cementing his reputation as the man to beat in the competition. The announcement of scores proceeded predictably until point 17 was called. Martinez, Rebecca. Score, 100. This time the silence lasted longer. Thompson's face had gone red with frustration, and several other candidates were openly staring at Becca as if she were some kind of optical illusion. "This is bullshit," Murphy declared loudly. "Nobody shoots perfect scores with a rifle that belongs in a pawn shop. Something's not right here." "Maybe she's using hand-loaded ammunition," suggested Chun. "Custom loads can sometimes compensate for equipment deficiencies." Harrison's voice cut through the speculation. "All ammunition is provided by the facility and is identical for all shooters. Standard M118LR match-grade cartridges from the same production lot." The implications of this announcement hit home immediately. If the ammunition was identical, then the perfect scores were a result of either the rifle's unexpected accuracy or the shooter's exceptional skill. Given the rifle's appearance, most candidates were reluctant to credit the equipment. Wells approached Becca during the break between stages. "I have to ask, what's your background? Where did you train to shoot like this?" "Various places," Becca replied, checking her rifle's action for any signs of fouling. "Started young, kept practicing." "That's not really an answer," Thompson interjected, his earlier mockery replaced by obvious irritation. "Nobody shoots perfect scores by accident. You've got serious training somewhere." "We all do, don't we?" Becca said mildly. "That's why we're here." The evasiveness of her responses only fueled more speculation. During the movement to the 600-yard line, small groups of candidates huddled together, discussing theories about their mysterious competitor. "I think she's sandbagging," Rodriguez said quietly to Thompson. "Pretending to be less skilled than she really is. Maybe trying to fly under the radar until the real competition begins." "But why use that piece of junk rifle?" Thompson replied. "If she's really that good, why handicap herself with equipment that should make accurate shooting impossible?" At 600 yards, the challenge increased exponentially. The targets appeared smaller through the scopes, and minute errors in windage or elevation would result in complete misses. This was where equipment advantages typically became decisive. Where precision rifles separated themselves from hunting guns, the shooting began with the same methodical precision as the previous stages. Thompson's confidence had returned somewhat surely at this distance. His superior equipment would reassert its natural advantage. His custom rifle was specifically designed for long-range precision, while the old Remington was built for hunting. Deer at modest ranges, shot after shot rang out across the range. The competitors fired with deliberate care, knowing that each round at this distance was precious. Misses were costly not just in points, but in the psychological advantage that came with consistent accuracy. The scoring process seemed to take forever. Candidates paced nervously behind the firing line, discussing their shots and second-guessing their hold points. At this distance, even experienced shooters sometimes struggled to determine if their shots were hits or misses. Finally, Harrison began announcing the results. Thompson scored a 95, excellent shooting that would have been impressive under any circumstances. Rodriguez managed a 93, fighting a slight crosswind that had developed during his string. Lee maintained his perfect streak, proving that his earlier scores weren't flukes. As the announcements progressed down the line, it became clear that the 600-yard stage had been challenging for everyone. Even the best shooters were dropping points to the increased difficulty. Firing point 17, Harrison called out. Martinez, Rebecca. Score, 100. The silence this time was absolute. 3 perfect scores in a row, fired with a rifle that looked like it belonged in a garage sale, by a shooter who had been written off as a charity case less than 24 hours earlier. Thompson walked directly to Becca's position. His earlier mockery replaced by something approaching desperation. "I need to see that rifle," he demanded. "There's something about it you're not telling us." Becca handed over the Remington without protest. Thompson examined it with the intensity of a detective, searching for evidence. He checked the barrel's crown, inspected the bedding, and even removed the scope to look for hidden modifications. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "The rifle's completely stock. Old, worn, but factory original. How the hell are you shooting? Perfect scores with this thing?" "It's a good rifle," Becca said simply. "Just needs someone who understands it." The response sent Thompson into barely controlled fury. "Understands it? Lady, I've been shooting precision rifles since before you were born. I know good equipment when I see it, and this isn't it. So either you're the luckiest shooter in military history, or there's something you're not telling us." The crowd of candidates had grown larger, drawn by Thompson's raised voice and obvious agitation. Their collective mood had shifted from amusement to suspicion, to something approaching hostility. The natural order they understood, where superior equipment led to superior performance, had been violated 3 times in a single morning. "Maybe we should ask Harrison to inspect the rifle," Wells suggested. "Make sure everything's legal in regulation." "Good idea," Murphy agreed. "Something's definitely not right here. Nobody's that good with that bad equipment." Becca remained calm in the face of their accusations, but something in her expression had hardened. The quiet acceptance of their earlier mockery was gone, replaced by a steely determination that several of the more observant candidates noticed. "Check whatever you want," she said quietly. "The rifle's exactly what it appears to be. The difference isn't in the equipment." The implication of her words hit home immediately. If the rifle wasn't special, then the extraordinary performance had to come from the shooter herself. For elite competitors who had built their identities around being the best, this possibility was almost too threatening to acknowledge. As the group returned to the facility for equipment cleaning and afternoon instruction, the dynamics had shifted completely. The woman they had dismissed as an amateur had demonstrated shooting skills that none of them could match, using equipment they considered worthless. The comfortable certainties that had defined their world were crumbling, and none of them knew how to respond. The second week of the Advanced Precision Rifle course brought weather that seemed designed to break spirits. A cold front had moved through Georgia, bringing with it gusty winds that shifted direction without warning, and intermittent rain that made visibility challenging. The pine trees surrounding the range swayed ominously, their branches creating an ever-changing symphony of wind noise that made reading conditions nearly impossible. Chief Warrant Officer Harrison stood in the briefing room, his expression grimmer than usual as he surveyed the 21 remaining candidates. 2 shooters had already been eliminated after consistently poor performance. Their dreams of completing the elite course dashed against the unforgiving standards of precision marksmanship. "Today marks a significant escalation in difficulty," Harrison announced, his voice carrying the weight of impending challenge. "We're moving to unknown distance shooting in adverse conditions. You'll be presented with targets at ranges varying from 400 to 1,000 meters. No range cards, no preliminary shots, no assistance from spotters." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Unknown distance shooting was considered one of the most challenging aspects of precision marksmanship, requiring shooters to accurately estimate range, account for environmental conditions, and make first-round hits without the luxury of adjustment shots. Furthermore, Harrison continued, the weather conditions you see outside are exactly what you'll be working in. Wind speeds are gusting between 15 and 30 miles per hour, with frequent direction changes. Visibility is degraded by intermittent precipitation. These are the conditions that separate true marksmen from range queens. Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Despite his expensive equipment and years of experience, unknown distance shooting in bad weather was his weakness. He preferred the controlled environment of known distance ranges, where he could calculate precise solutions and make careful adjustments. "Each shooter will engage 5 targets in sequence," Harrison explained. "You'll have 30 seconds to identify each target, estimate range, make environmental calculations, and fire. Miss your target, and you're eliminated from the course. Questions?" The silence stretched for several heartbeats before Wells raised her hand. "Sir, 30 seconds seems insufficient for proper range estimation and ballistic calculation, especially in these conditions. In combat, the enemy doesn't provide unlimited time for calculation," Harrison replied sharply. 30 seconds is generous compared to real-world scenarios. You'll adapt or you'll fail." The candidates filed out into the driving rain, their expensive weather gear providing little comfort against the psychological pressure of the coming challenge. The range had been transformed into a realistic tactical environment, with targets placed at varying elevations and partially concealed behind natural obstacles. Becca emerged from the building wearing the same basic rain gear issued to all military personnel, her ancient rifle protected by a simple plastic sleeve. The contrast between her modest preparations and the elaborate protective measures taken by other candidates was stark. "Look at her," Murphy said to Foster as they watched Becca check her rifle's action. "Doesn't even have a proper scope cover. That old glass is going to fog up the minute she tries to shoot." "Maybe that's her strategy," Foster replied. "Get eliminated early and avoid the embarrassment of failing publicly." The shooting order had been determined by the previous week's cumulative scores, which meant Becca would shoot last. This arrangement suited the other candidates perfectly. They would demonstrate proper technique and equipment advantage while she struggled with her inadequate gear. Rodriguez was first up, approaching the firing line with his customized Savage rifle. The first target was visible at what appeared to be approximately 600 meters, partially obscured by a cluster of pine trees. He deployed his expensive range-finding binoculars, quickly determining the exact distance, then consulted his ballistic calculator to account for wind and elevation. His shot was precise and confident, striking the target center mass. The crowd of observing candidates nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of professional performance they expected from elite shooters with proper equipment. Thompson followed with similar success, his custom Remington 700 performing flawlessly despite the challenging conditions. His shooting process was methodical and deliberate, utilizing every piece of technology at his disposal to ensure accurate hits. Lee maintained his reputation for consistency, engaging each target with the same robotic precision that had carried him through the previous week's challenges. His Accuracy International rifle seemed impervious to weather conditions, delivering rounds exactly where they were intended. One by one, the candidates demonstrated their skills and equipment advantages. Some struggled with the time constraints, rushing their shots and missing targets by narrow margins. Others succumbed to the pressure of unknown distances, misjudging ranges and sending rounds high or low. By the time 15 candidates had completed the course, 8 had been eliminated. The survivors represented the cream of military marksmanship, shooters whose combination of skill and equipment had proven equal to the challenge. Captain James Wilson, an Air Force Special Operations sniper, was the 16th to attempt the course. His confidence was evident as he approached the firing line, but the weather conditions had worsened significantly. Rain was falling steadily now, and wind gusts were approaching the upper limits of what most precision rifles could compensate for. Wilson's first shot struck home, but his second target, a challenging uphill shot at approximately 800 meters, proved his undoing. The bullet went wide in a sudden wind gust, and he joined the growing group of eliminated candidates. The pressure was mounting on the remaining shooters. Master Sergeant Paul Anderson, whose credentials included multiple sniper school graduations and combat deployments, found himself struggling with target identification in the degraded visibility. His third shot missed completely, victim to a range estimation error compounded by the difficult conditions. When Sergeant First Class Maria Santos stepped to the line, only 6 candidates remained. Her Tikka T3 rifle had performed admirably throughout the course, but the combination of time pressure and adverse weather proved too much. She engaged her 4th target confidently, only to watch her bullet strike low, a victim of not accounting for the downhill angle properly. The eliminations continued with mechanical precision. Each failure reinforced the difficulty of the challenge and the slim margin for error that existed at this level of competition. Equipment malfunctions claimed one shooter when his scope fogged at a critical moment. Another candidate was eliminated by a simple mathematical error in range estimation that sent his bullet several feet wide of the target. When Harrison called for the final shooter, only Becca remained. The crowd of eliminated candidates had gathered to watch, their elimination having freed them from the pressure of performance. Many were openly skeptical that anyone could complete the course with her equipment, given the conditions that had defeated shooters with far superior gear. "Martinez," Harrison announced, "you're up. Same rules apply, 5 targets, 30 seconds each, no second chances." Becca approached the firing line with the same calm demeanor she had displayed throughout the course. The rain had intensified, creating a steady drumming noise on her plastic scope cover, and wind gusts were strong enough to move her body position slightly as she settled into her shooting stance. She removed the scope cover and immediately began scanning for her first target. Where other candidates had spent precious seconds deploying range-finding equipment, she seemed to rely entirely on visual estimation. Her assessment was quick but thorough, taking in not just the target location but the entire environmental picture. First target appeared to be at approximately 500 meters, positioned on a slight rise behind a fallen log. Becca shouldered her rifle, acquired the target through her simple fixed-power scope, and fired within 20 seconds of Harrison's command. The target fell immediately, struck center mass by the heavy bullet from the old Remington. Thompson leaned forward, straining to see through the rain and mist. "Lucky shot," he muttered. She never maintained that with the harder targets. The second target was significantly more challenging, a longer shot at what appeared to be 700 meters, positioned at a sharp downhill angle that would require careful compensation for the ballistic effects of gravity. Most of the eliminated candidates had struggled with similar angular shots. Becca's approach was markedly different from her predecessors. Instead of consulting calculators or reference cards, she seemed to process the entire shooting problem intuitively. Her rifle came up smoothly. She made a brief adjustment to her scope's elevation dial and fired with 15 seconds remaining on the clock. The distant target disappeared behind the impact of another perfectly placed shot. "This is impossible," Rodriguez said quietly. "Nobody estimates range that quickly and accurately without instruments. She's either the luckiest shooter alive or ... He didn't finish the thought. but the implications hung in the air like the morning mist. If luck wasn't responsible for her performance, then they were witnessing something far more significant than simple marksmanship skill. The third target presented a lateral challenge positioned at approximately 600 meters but requiring a significant windage correction due to a crosswind that was gusting unpredictably. Several previous candidates had been eliminated by similar shots, their bullets blown wide despite careful calculations. Becca took a moment longer to assess this target, reading the wind signs with an intensity that suggested deep understanding of ballistics and environmental conditions. She observed grass movement at multiple points along the bullet's projected path, noted the behavior of light debris being carried by air currents, and even seemed to time her shot to coincide with a lull in the gusting wind. Her bullet found its mark with authority, striking the target with enough force to spin it completely around on its mounting post. The fourth target was positioned at the maximum range for the course, 1,000 meters on relatively flat ground, but partially obscured by vegetation that required precise shot placement to ensure a hit. The distance alone was intimidating, representing the outer limits of what most military snipers would attempt with standard rifles and ammunition. For the first time since beginning the course, Becca hesitated. She studied the target through her scope for several seconds, making minute adjustments to her body position and sight picture. The old Weaver scope was never designed for such extreme ranges, its simple reticle and fixed magnification representing serious disadvantages compared to the advanced optics used by other candidates. She fired with just 5 seconds remaining on the time limit. The bullet's flight time at that range meant several seconds of waiting before impact could be observed. The crowd of onlookers held their breath collectively, straining to see through the rain and distance to the target location. When the target fell, struck by a bullet fired from a rifle that most considered incapable of such accuracy, the silence was profound. The fifth and final target was positioned to be the course's ultimate challenge, a moving target that traveled along a predetermined path at approximately 800 meters. Candidates were required to time their shot to intercept the target during its movement, adding the complexity of leading a moving object to all the other challenges they had already faced. Most of the eliminated candidates had failed on stationary targets well before reaching this final challenge. Those who had attempted it found the combination of range estimation, environmental compensation, and target leading to be beyond their capabilities under the imposed time constraints. Becca watched the target complete one full cycle of its movement pattern, timing its speed and studying the rhythm of its travel. She seemed to internalize the entire ballistic problem range: wind, target movement, and bullet flight time processing, all variables simultaneously. Her shot was timed perfectly. The bullet intercepted the moving target at the precise moment when its path coincided with the projectile's trajectory, sending it tumbling to the ground in a testament to marksmanship that bordered on the supernatural. Harrison's voice crackled over the range loudspeaker system. Course complete. Martinez is the only candidate to successfully engage all 5 targets. The crowd of eliminated candidates stood in stunned silence, watching as Becca calmly saved her rifle and began packing her equipment. The impossible had been accomplished using a rifle they had dismissed as worthless by a shooter they had initially considered unqualified to compete at their level. Thompson approached her with a mixture of respect and desperation in his voice. That was an extraordinary shooting. But I have to ask, how did you estimate those ranges so accurately without instruments? How did you calculate wind compensation so quickly? Becca looked up from securing her rifle in its worn case. Same way shooters did it for centuries before rangefinders and ballistic calculators were invented. You learn to read the environment and trust your training. The simplicity of her answer only deepened the mystery. If traditional methods were sufficient for such extraordinary performance, why did everyone else rely so heavily on technology? Why had their expensive equipment failed to provide the advantages they expected? As the group returned to the facility, the questions multiplied. The comfortable assumptions about equipment superiority and technological advantage had been shattered by a performance that defied explanation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but nothing would ever be quite the same for any of them. The elimination of 15 candidates in a single afternoon had fundamentally altered the atmosphere at the Advanced Precision Rifle course. What had begun as a gathering of elite military marksmen had been reduced to a small group of survivors, each acutely aware that they had witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about precision shooting. The remaining 6 candidates sat in the facility's dining hall that evening, picking at their meals while stealing glances at Becca, who ate alone at a corner table. The easy camaraderie that had characterized the early days of the course had evaporated, replaced by a tension that made normal conversation impossible. Doc Thompson pushed his food around his plate, his appetite destroyed by the day's revelations. His custom rifle, worth more than most people's cars, had performed flawlessly during the morning's known distance work, yet he had been eliminated alongside shooters with far inferior equipment. The logic that had governed his understanding of marksmanship had been turned upside down. "I keep running through those shots in my head," he said quietly to Rodriguez. "My range estimation was perfect. Wind calls were spot on. Equipment functioned flawlessly. But I still missed that third target." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Same here. Everything I did was technically correct, but somehow it wasn't enough. Meanwhile, she's making impossible shots with a rifle that belongs in a museum." Master Sergeant Clark, who had managed to survive the elimination round by the narrowest of margins, overheard their conversation. "I've been thinking about that rifle of hers. What if we've been wrong about it? What if there's something special we can't see?" "Like what?" Thompson asked. "I examined it myself. Stock manufacture, worn barrel, cheap scope. There's nothing there that would explain that kind of performance." "Then it has to be her," Wells said, joining the conversation. "But that raises even more questions. Where did she train? Who taught her to shoot like that? And why is she here, competing against us instead of teaching at some advanced sniper school?" The questions hung in the air without answers. Becca's personnel file was surprisingly thin. Basic military training records, standard qualifications, nothing that would indicate exceptional marksmanship ability. Yet her performance spoke of training and experience that went far beyond anything documented in official records. Lee, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should ask her directly. We're all supposed to be professionals here. If she's willing to share her background, we might learn something valuable." The suggestion was met with mixed reactions. Thompson's pride bristled at the idea of asking for help from someone he had initially dismissed as unqualified. But his desperation to understand what he had witnessed overrode his ego. "You're right," he said finally. "We need answers." The group approached Becca's table with the awkward uncertainty of students approaching a teacher they had previously mocked. She looked up from her meal as they gathered around, her expression neutral but not unwelcoming. "Mind if we join you?" Wells asked. "We have some questions about today's shooting, if you're willing to discuss it." Becca gestured to the empty chairs around her table. "Of course. What did you want to know?" Thompson cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "Your performance today was extraordinary. The rest of us had equipment advantages, training, backgrounds, competitive experience, but you outshot all of us with gear we considered inadequate. We're trying to understand how that's possible. And we're not asking to be critical," Rodriguez added quickly. "We genuinely want to learn. If there are techniques or approaches we're missing, we need to know about them." Becca studied their faces for a moment, as if evaluating their sincerity. Finally, she set down her fork and leaned back in her chair. "The equipment isn't as important as you think," she began. A good shooter can make accurate hits with almost any rifle that's mechanically sound. The key is understanding your equipment's limitations and working within them instead of fighting against them. But those ranges, Clark protested. 1,000 meters with a hunting rifle and a basic scope. That shouldn't be possible. Why not? Becca asked. Hunters have been making long shots for generations with similar equipment. Military snipers in World War II and Korea achieved remarkable accuracy with rifles that would be considered primitive by today's standards. The capability has always existed. We've just convinced ourselves that we need expensive gear to access it. Thompson frowned, struggling with the implications of her words. Are you saying that all our equipment advantages are meaningless? That technology doesn't provide real benefits? I'm saying that technology can become a crutch, Becca replied. When you rely entirely on rangefinders and ballistic calculators, you stop developing your natural ability to read environments and estimate distances. When you depend on perfect conditions and unlimited time, you never learn to make quick decisions. Under pressure. Lee leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. So how do you estimate range without instruments? How do you calculate wind effects so quickly? Becca smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Experience and observation. You learn to recognize visual cues that indicate distance, how much detail you can see on a target, how atmospheric haze affects clarity, how objects appear relative to their surroundings. Wind reading comes from watching grass movement, dust patterns, mirage effects. It's not magic, it's just skills that used to be considered fundamental to marksmanship. But the precision, Wells insisted. Those weren't just hits, they were perfect center mass impacts. That level of accuracy requires more than basic fieldcraft. It requires understanding your rifle, Becca said. Every weapon has its own personality, its own preferences for ammunition, its own quirks in how it responds to environmental changes. When you take time to really know your equipment, you can achieve remarkable accuracy, even with modest gear. Rodriguez was taking notes now, writing down every word as if it were gospel. How long does it take to develop that kind of understanding? Years? Decades? Depends on how much you're willing to unlearn, Becca replied cryptically. Most experienced shooters have developed habits that limit their potential. They're so focused on technology and procedure that they've lost touch with the fundamentals. The conversation continued for another hour, with Becca patiently answering questions about shooting techniques that the others had never considered. She spoke about reading terrain features to predict wind patterns, using natural reference points for range estimation, and developing the mental discipline to trust instinctive knowledge over calculated solutions. As the evening progressed, Thompson found his initial skepticism giving way to fascination. The techniques Becca described weren't revolutionary, they were traditional skills that had been largely forgotten in the rush to embrace technological solutions. Would you be willing to work with us? He asked finally. Share some of these techniques during our practice time? Becca considered the request carefully. I can show you some things, but you'll need to approach it with an open mind. You'll have to temporarily set aside some of the methods you've relied on and try a different approach. We're willing to try anything, Wells said earnestly. Today showed us that our current approach has limitations we didn't recognize. The next morning brought clear skies and calm conditions, perfect weather for precision shooting. Harrison had announced a free practice session, allowing the remaining candidates to work on specific skills and equipment familiarization. Becca set up at a firing point overlooking targets at various distances, her ancient rifle drawing curious glances from the other survivors. True to her word from the previous evening, she began demonstrating the technique she had described. Range estimation starts with knowing your rifle's capabilities, she explained to the small group gathered around her. This rifle with standard ammunition drops approximately 30 inches at 600 yards. If I hold dead on and the bullet impacts low, I can use that drop to confirm my distance estimate. She fired a shot at a target that appeared to be roughly 600 meters away. The bullet struck several inches below the aim point, exactly as she had predicted. Now I know the range is close to 600 meters, she continued. I can use that information to refine my hold for the next shot. Her second shot struck the target center mass, demonstrating the practical application of the technique she had described. Thompson tried the same approach with his custom rifle, using his precisely calculated ballistic data to predict bullet drop. His results were accurate but slow. The methodical process of consulting his data cards and making calculations took significantly longer than Becca's intuitive approach. The goal isn't to abandon precision, Becca explained. It's to internalize the knowledge so you can access it quickly when conditions don't allow for detailed calculations. Over the next several hours, she worked with each of the remaining candidates individually, helping them develop skills they had never considered necessary. Rodriguez learned to estimate range by comparing target size to known reference points. Wells practiced reading wind conditions by observing grass movement and dust patterns. Clark worked on developing consistent shooting positions that didn't require bipods or other mechanical supports. Lee, who had been the most successful candidate throughout the course, found the new techniques particularly challenging. His reliance on technology and procedure had made him extremely accurate under controlled conditions, but less adaptable when those supports weren't available. I keep wanting to use my rangefinder, he admitted after missing a target at an estimated 400 yards. It feels wrong to guess when I have instruments that can give me exact measurements. The instruments are tools, Becca replied. Valuable tools, but they shouldn't become crutches. What happens when your rangefinder batteries die in the middle of a mission? What if your ballistic calculator gets damaged? You need backup skills that don't depend on technology. As the practice session continued, subtle changes began appearing in the candidate's shooting. Thompson's shots became more consistent as he learned to trust his natural ability to read wind conditions. Rodriguez discovered that his instinctive range estimates were more accurate than he had believed possible. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Decades of relying on technological solutions couldn't be overturned in a single morning. But seeds of change had been planted, and each successful shot using traditional techniques reinforced the validity of Becca's approach. By afternoon, the atmosphere among the remaining candidates had changed dramatically. The hostility and suspicion that had characterized their earlier interactions with Becca had been replaced by respect and genuine curiosity. They began to see her not as a competitor to be defeated, but as a teacher whose knowledge could benefit them all. Harrison observed the practice session from his tower, watching through binoculars as techniques that had been largely forgotten were passed from one shooter to another. A slight smile crossed his weathered face as he witnessed the transformation taking place below. That evening, the surviving candidates gathered again in the dining hall, but this time the conversation was animated and positive. They discussed the day's lessons, shared observations about their improving performance, and planned additional practice sessions. I can't believe how much I was limiting myself, Wells said, examining her rifle with new appreciation. I was so focused on having the perfect equipment that I never learned to maximize what I already had. Same here, Rodriguez agreed. I thought technology was supposed to make shooting easier, but it was actually making me dependent and less adaptable. Thompson, who had undergone perhaps the most dramatic change in perspective, looked across the table at Becca with genuine admiration. I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I dismissed you based on appearances and assumptions. I was wrong, and I'm grateful you were willing to share your knowledge despite how we treated you. Becca accepted his apology with characteristic grace. We all make judgments based on limited information. What matters is being willing to change when we learn something new. As the evening wound down, The 6 survivors prepared for whatever challenges the remaining weeks of the course would bring. They were no longer the same group of individual competitors who had arrived at Fort Benning weeks earlier. They had become something more collaborative, more adaptable, and infinitely more capable than they had been before their encounter with an unassuming woman and her ancient rifle. The real test, however, was still to come. 3 weeks into the advanced precision rifle course, an unscheduled visitor arrived at Fort Benning. The black SUV with government plates pulled up to the administration building just as the morning briefing was concluding, its tinted windows revealing nothing about its occupants. Chief Warrant Officer Harrison received the call in his office. While reviewing the day's training schedule, his expression grew increasingly grave as he listened to the voice on the other end of the line. When he finally hung up, he sat in silence for several minutes, staring at a personnel file that had been delivered with the morning's classified communications. The file was marked with security classifications that few people at Fort Benning were authorized to see. Its contents painted a very different picture of Rebecca Martinez than the sparse military records that had accompanied her arrival at the course. Harrison walked to his office window and looked out at the range where the 6 remaining candidates were conducting morning practice. Through his binoculars, he could see Becca working with Thompson on wind reading techniques, patiently demonstrating how to interpret mirage patterns through a rifle scope. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was Thompson, a man who had built his reputation on being the military's finest precision marksman, learning fundamental skills from someone whose true identity would shock him to his core. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called, turning away from the window. A woman in civilian clothes stepped into the office, though everything about her bearing suggested military or intelligence background. She was tall and athletic, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room. "Chief Harrison," she said, extending her hand. "Deputy Director Sarah Fleming, Defense Intelligence Agency. I believe you received notification of my visit." Harrison shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze. "Yes, ma'am. Though I have to say, your timing is interesting. We're in the middle of a training evolution." "That's exactly why I'm here," Fleming replied, settling into the chair across from Harrison's desk. "We need to discuss one of your candidates, Rebecca Martinez." Harrison opened the classified file on his desk, though he suspected Fleming knew its contents better than he did. "I take it there's more to her background than what appeared in her original records." "Considerably more," Fleming confirmed. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Martinez isn't just another military marksman looking to improve her skills. She's one of the most accomplished snipers in recent military history, operating under cover identities for missions that don't officially exist." The revelation hit Harrison like a physical blow. He had suspected there was something unusual about Becca's abilities, but this went far beyond his wildest theories. "Her real name is Rebecca Martinez," Fleming continued, "but for the past 8 years, she's been known in certain circles by a different designation, Ghost 7. She's responsible for some of the most impossible shots in modern warfare, all accomplished with deliberately outdated equipment to maintain operational security." Harrison leaned back in his chair, pieces of a complex puzzle suddenly falling into place. "Ghost 7. I've heard rumors, but I thought it was just another military legend." "Very real, I assure you," Fleming said. "The rifle she's using, that ancient Remington 788, is actually a precisely engineered weapon designed to look unremarkable. The stock has been custom-bedded, the barrel is a match-grade replacement made to look worn, and the scope contains proprietary optics that appear basic, but provide capabilities most snipers can only dream of." The implications were staggering. Harrison thought about all the times he had watched other candidates examine Becca's rifle, searching for hidden modifications they couldn't find. The deception had been so complete that even experienced armorers had been fooled. "Why is she here?" Harrison asked. "If she's as accomplished as you say, what could she possibly learn from this course?" Fleming's expression grew serious. "She's not here to learn. She's here to evaluate." The military is considering a fundamental shift in sniper training philosophy, moving away from technology dependence toward more traditional fieldcraft skills. Martinez is assessing whether standard military personnel can adapt to these older techniques. "And the other candidates, do they know?" "They have no idea who she really is," Fleming replied. "As far as they're concerned, she's just another participant who happened to get lucky with the equipment draw." "That's about to change." Fleming reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "These are Martinez's actual service records, declassified for this specific purpose. Her mission parameters have changed. She's now authorized to reveal her identity and begin formal instruction in advanced techniques." Harrison opened the envelope and began reading, his eyebrows rising with each page. The documented achievements were almost beyond belief, shots at ranges that pushed the absolute limits of rifle capability, made under conditions that would have challenged the world's best marksmen. "There's one more thing," Fleming added. "The rifle assignment wasn't random. We arranged for her to receive the worst weapon deliberately. It was part of the psychological evaluation we were conducting on the other candidates. We wanted to see how they would react to being outperformed by someone they considered inferior." The depth of the deception was breathtaking. Harrison realized that virtually everything about Becca's presence at the course had been carefully orchestrated, from her modest appearance to her gradual revelation of extraordinary abilities. "When do you want her to reveal her identity?" he asked. "This afternoon," Fleming replied. "There's going to be a special demonstration for military leadership generals and senior enlisted personnel who are evaluating the new training paradigm. Martinez will demonstrate capabilities that will change how we think about precision marksmanship." As Fleming left his office, Harrison remained at his desk, studying the classified files and trying to process the magnitude of what he had learned. The woman who had been dismissed as an amateur by his best students was actually one of the most lethal snipers in military history. Meanwhile, on the range, the afternoon practice session was proceeding normally. The 6 remaining candidates had formed an informal study group, working together to master the traditional techniques that Becca had been teaching them. The competitive atmosphere that had characterized the early days of the course had been replaced by collaborative learning. Thompson was making remarkable progress with instinctive range estimation, his natural abilities finally freed from over-reliance on technological aids. Rodriguez had developed an almost supernatural ability to read wind conditions, interpreting subtle environmental cues that had previously escaped his notice. "I can't believe how much my shooting has improved," Wells said as she prepared for another string of fire. "These old-school techniques actually work better than all the gadgets I used to depend on. It's like rediscovering something we never knew we had lost," Lee agreed. "All those years of training, and nobody ever taught us the fundamentals that actually matter." Becca listened to their conversations with mixed emotions. She had grown genuinely fond of these dedicated professionals, and she knew that the revelation coming this afternoon would fundamentally change their relationship. The respect and friendship they had developed was based on their perception of her as a peer, not as a legendary figure whose abilities exceeded their own by orders of magnitude. At 1400 hours, Harrison's voice crackled over the range public address system. "All candidates report to the main briefing room immediately. Bring your rifles and full kit." The group exchanged puzzled glances as they secured their equipment and headed toward the building. Unscheduled briefings were unusual, and the formal tone suggested something significant was about to happen. When they entered the briefing room, they found it filled with military personnel. They didn't recognize officers with stars on their shoulders and senior enlisted personnel with ribbons indicating decades of service. At the front of the room stood Harrison, Fleming, and several other officials whose presence suggested this was no ordinary training event. "Gentlemen and ladies," Harrison began, his voice carrying unusual gravity, "you are about to witness a demonstration that will change your understanding of precision marksmanship. But first, there are some things you need to know about one of your fellow candidates." He gestured toward Becca, who stood at attention near the front of the room. Her demeanor had changed subtly. The unassuming modesty that had characterized her behavior throughout the course had been replaced by the bearing of someone accustomed to command and exceptional responsibility. "The woman you know as Rebecca Martinez has been operating under a cover identity for the duration of this course," Harrison announced. "Her real designation within certain classified programs is Ghost 7, and she is quite possibly the most accomplished sniper in modern military history." The silence in the room was absolute. Thompson felt his world tilt on its axis as the implications of Harrison's words sank in. The woman who had patiently taught him wind-reading techniques was a legendary operator whose exploits were whispered about in elite military circles. Fleming stepped forward, taking over the briefing. "Ghost 7 has been responsible for eliminating high-value targets under conditions that were previously considered impossible. Her confirmed kill record includes shots at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, made with deliberately basic equipment to maintain operational security." Rodriguez stared at Becca as if seeing her for the first time. Everything about her presence at the course suddenly made sense: the inexplicable accuracy, the deep knowledge of traditional techniques, the calm confidence under pressure that had seemed almost supernatural. "The rifle she has been using," Fleming continued, "is not the outdated hunting weapon it appears to be. It is a precisely engineered system designed to look unremarkable while delivering performance that rivals the most advanced sniper rifles in existence." Wells found her voice first among the stunned candidates. "You mean ... everything we thought we knew was wrong?" "Not wrong." Becca spoke for the first time since the revelation began. "Incomplete. The techniques I've been teaching. You are real and valuable. The equipment advantages you thought you needed aren't as important as the skills you've been developing." Clark shook his head in amazement. "Ghost 7, the Phantom of Kandahar, the Angel of Mosul, all those stories we thought were exaggerated were probably understated," Fleming replied with a slight smile. "The classified nature of her missions meant that most details couldn't be revealed, even in legend form." Thompson struggled to process the magnitude of the deception. "So when you said the rifle assignment was random ... It wasn't," Harrison admitted. "We wanted to see how you would react to being outperformed by someone you considered inferior. Your responses were part of an evaluation we were conducting on behalf of senior leadership." The revelation continued for another hour, with Fleming and Harrison providing details about Becca's actual service record and the purposes behind her presence at the course. The candidates learned that they had been unknowing participants in an experiment designed to test whether traditional marksmanship skills could be successfully integrated into modern military training. As the briefing concluded, the visiting officials filed out, leaving the 6 candidates alone with Harrison and their transformed understanding of who Becca really was. The woman who had been dismissed as an amateur was revealed as a master whose skills exceeded anything they had previously imagined possible. The afternoon demonstration would prove even more shocking than the morning's revelations. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fort Benning's extended range complex as the most challenging demonstration in the facility's history was prepared. Word had spread through military channels, and observers from elite units across all service branches had gathered to witness what was being called an impossible shot scenario. The target had been positioned at 2,400 meters, nearly a mile, and a half away on a ridgeline that required precise calculation of both elevation and wind compensation. What made the shot truly extraordinary wasn't just the distance, but the conditions. A gusty crosswind that shifted unpredictably, late afternoon heat shimmer that distorted the target image, and atmospheric pressure changes that would affect bullet trajectory. Deputy Director Fleming stood before the assembled crowd of military brass and elite operators, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to witness represents the pinnacle of precision marksmanship using traditional fieldcraft techniques. No laser rangefinders, no ballistic computers, no weather stations, just the skills that snipers relied on for generations before modern technology. The 5 remaining candidates from Harrison's course stood in a group, still processing the revelation of Becca's true identity. Thompson found himself studying her with new eyes, seeing details he had missed before, the unconscious way she constantly assessed wind conditions, how her gaze automatically calculated ranges to distant objects, the subtle confidence that came from years of making impossible shots under extreme pressure. "Go 7, Fleming announced. "We'll demonstrate a technique we call environmental integration, reading battlefield conditions so thoroughly that the rifle becomes an extension of the shooter's intuitive understanding of ballistics and physics." Becca stepped forward, carrying the rifle that had fooled everyone for weeks. In the harsh afternoon light, it still looked like an unremarkable hunting weapon from the 1970s. Only now did the observers understand that its shabby appearance was the most sophisticated camouflage of all. She moved to the firing position with economic precision, settling into a prone stance that seemed to meld her body with the terrain. For several minutes, she simply observed, watching grass movement at multiple distances, studying heat mirage patterns, noting how dust particles behaved in the shifting air currents. "The first step," she said loud enough for the nearest observers to hear, "is understanding that you're not just shooting at a target. You're navigating a 3-dimensional environment where air density, temperature gradients, and pressure differentials all affect bullet flight." Through her scope, the target appeared impossibly small, barely visible even at maximum magnification. The heat shimmer made it dance and waver, creating an optical illusion that would confound most marksmen. But Becca had made similar shots dozens of times in combat situations where failure meant mission compromise and potential loss of life. She began making minute adjustments to her position, compensating for the slope of the ground and ensuring optimal body alignment. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm that had become second nature over years of high-pressure shooting. Wind reading at extreme range requires understanding air movement at multiple levels. She continued, her voice steady despite the immense technical challenge she was facing. Surface winds, mid-level currents, and high-altitude patterns all influence trajectory differently. Rodriguez, watching from the observation area, shook his head in amazement. "She's giving a lecture while preparing for a shot that would challenge the world's best marksman. The confidence is incredible." Through her scope, Becca identified the precise moment when wind conditions aligned for optimal bullet flight. The grass at 600 meters showed a leftward bend, while dust at the 1,000-meter mark indicated a slight right deflection. The mirage pattern suggested a temperature inversion that would cause the bullet to rise slightly in the middle portion of its flight. All of these variables had to be processed instantaneously and translated into a single aiming point that would account for every factor affecting the bullet's 2.5-second journey to the target. She fired without fanfare, a single, sharp crack that echoed across the range. For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. The bullet was invisible in flight, its progress marked only by the stopwatch in Fleming's hand as she counted off the seconds. Then, through the high-powered spotting scopes trained on the distant target, observers saw it happen. The target snapped backward, struck dead center by a bullet that had traveled over a mile. Through constantly changing atmospheric conditions, the silence that followed was profound. Even among this gathering of elite military personnel, accustomed to exceptional marksmanship, What they had witnessed transcended normal understanding of what was humanly possible. General Patricia Morrison, a 3-star whose career had spanned multiple combat theaters, was the first to speak. In 30 years of military service, I have never seen shooting of that caliber. The precision required to make that shot exceeds anything I thought possible with individual small arms. Thompson approached Becca as she safed her rifle, his expression mixing admiration with professional curiosity. That shot the way you read those wind conditions. How did you process all those variables so quickly? Experience, Becca replied simply, beginning to break down her position. After enough rounds downrange in enough different conditions, pattern recognition becomes intuitive. You stop calculating and start feeling the solution. But the training required to reach that level, Wells interjected. How long does it take to develop those instincts? Fleming answered for Becca. Ghost 7 has been conducting precision missions in classified theaters for 8 years. Her training regimen includes scenarios that most snipers will never encounter in their entire careers. Lee, who had been quietly absorbing the demonstration, finally found his voice. The techniques you've been teaching us, are they preparation for this level of shooting? They're the foundation, Becca confirmed. Range estimation, wind reading, environmental assessment. These skills scale up to extreme distances when you develop them properly. The equipment becomes less important than the shooter's ability to read conditions and make accurate first-round hits. As the demonstration concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Harrison gathered the 5 surviving candidates for a private conversation with Becca. The formal structure of the course had been fundamentally altered by the revelation of her identity, but there were still lessons to be learned. What happens now? Rodriguez asked. Do we continue the course as if nothing has changed? Everything has changed, Harrison replied. You've been selected to participate in a pilot program for advanced fieldcraft instruction. If you choose to accept, you'll spend the next 3 weeks learning techniques that aren't taught in any standard military school. Thompson didn't hesitate. We're in, all of us. The others nodded agreement, recognizing that they had been offered access to knowledge and training that could fundamentally transform their capabilities as military marksmen. Over the following weeks, Becca revealed techniques that had been developed through years of classified operations. She taught them to read terrain features that indicated wind patterns miles away, to estimate ranges using atmospheric perspective and target detail resolution, to make precise shots using improvised rests and field expedient positions. More importantly, she taught them to trust their instincts over their instruments, to develop the confidence needed to make critical shots when technology failed or wasn't available. The transformation in their shooting was remarkable. Thompson, freed from over-reliance on ballistic calculators, discovered an intuitive understanding of trajectory that allowed him to make rapid adjustments under changing conditions. Rodriguez developed wind-reading skills that approached supernatural accuracy. Wells learned to estimate ranges with precision that rivaled expensive range-finding equipment. By the course's end, all 5 candidates had achieved shooting capabilities that exceeded their previous limitations by significant margins. More importantly, they had internalized a philosophy of marksmanship that emphasized adaptability and fundamental skills over technological dependence. The graduation ceremony was attended by the same senior officials who had witnessed the long-range demonstration. General Morrison presented certificates to the 5 graduates, but her remarks focused on the broader implications of what they had accomplished. You represent the first graduates of a new approach to precision marksmanship training, she announced. Your experiences here will be used to develop curricula for advanced sniper schools throughout the military. The techniques you've learned will eventually be taught to hundreds of other marksmen. As the ceremony concluded, Becca prepared to depart for her next assignment. Her cover identity would be retired, but the impact of her time at Fort Benning would continue for years through the students she had trained. Thompson approached her as she loaded her equipment into a waiting vehicle. "Will we see you again? Continue training under your instruction?" "You don't need me anymore," Becca replied with a slight smile. "You have the foundation. Now you need to build on it through practice and experience. In a few years you'll be teaching these techniques to the next generation of marksmen." As her vehicle disappeared down the road leading away from Fort Benning, the 5 graduates stood together, each understanding that they had participated in something historically significant. They had witnessed the revival of traditional marksmanship skills that had been nearly lost to technological advancement. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Derek Thompson stood before a class of Marine Scout sniper candidates at Quantico, holding an old rifle that looked remarkably unremarkable. The students examined it with barely concealed skepticism, noting its worn stock and basic scope. "This rifle," Thompson announced to his class, "is going to teach you more about precision marksmanship than all the expensive equipment in our armory. By the end of this course, you'll understand that the most important component of any rifle system isn't the barrel, the trigger, or the scope." He paused, remembering his own transformation from equipment-dependent competitor to adaptable field marksman. It's the person behind it. The legacy continued, passed from instructor to student, ensuring that the hard-learned lessons of traditional fieldcraft would never again be forgotten in the pursuit of technological advancement. The ghost had become a teacher, and her influence would echo through generations of military marksmen who understood that true expertise couldn't be purchased, only earned through dedication, practice, and respect for the fundamental skills that had always defined exceptional shooting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.